was Albert Einstein. Chapter 6 War Again. Unless a cause of peace based on law gathers behind it the force and zeal of a religion, it hardly can hope to succeed. Albert Einstein. Albert's fame throughout his brought him thousands of letters from people all over the world. Not just scientists either. Kids, newspapers, reporters, political leaders, college students, they all wrote to him. Many of the letters came from Jewish people right in Germany. They were kept out of schools, denied jobs, and not allowed to vote. Albert was Jewish. Couldn't he do anything? For a long time, Albert wanted to help create a homeland for Jewish people. The current Jewish nation of Israel did not exist in the early 1900s. The land where Israel is now was called Palestine. Like many other Jews, Albert thought that this area is where Jewish homeland belonged. In 1921, Albert traveled with other important Jewish people to the United States. He wanted to raise money for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Albert enjoyed the long boat trip from Europe to America. He looked out the endless ocean and felt dissolved and immersed in nature. It reminded Albert of how tiny one man was compared to the greatness of nature. He was not so important as the world was making him out to be. That thought, he said, makes me happy. So Albert was quite surprised to see thousands of people, including reporters and photographers, waiting at the pier when his ship arrived in New York City. Wherever he went, there were huge crowds eager to see the genius who unlocked the secrets of the universe. The mayor of New York personally welcomed him and presented Albert with a key to the city. There was a parade in his honor. When Albert visited Washington, D.C., President Warren Harding invited him to the White House. Albert's eccentric genius look was a big hit with Americans. With his wild hair, messy clothes, and friendly personality, Albert charmed reporters. He was often asked, "Could you briefly explain your theory of relativity?" This question drove Albert nuts. After all, it had taken him 15 years of immense thinking to develop the theory. But he'd take a deep breath and smile. When a man sits with a pretty girl for an hour, it seems like a minute. But let him sit at a hot stove for a minute, and it's longer than an hour. That's relativity. Although Albert was a superstar in the United States, he was an unwanted problem in Germany. Although he still had his teaching job in Berlin, it became harder for Albert to stay in Germany with each passing year. After the Nazis took control of Germany in 1930, Albert's life was increasingly dangerous. Nazis hated Jews, intellectuals, and pacifists. Albert was all three. When Nazis emptied university libraries of their books and burned them, it was often Albert's books that topped the huge bonfires. In 1930, Albert had done most of his best scientific thinking. His focus now was on politics and public speaking. This made the Nazis even angrier. For his safety, Elsa pled with Albert to stop speaking out against the Nazis. He refused. He said, "I wouldn't be Einstein if I kept quiet." He also refused to leave Germany, even though more and more friends and family begged him to. The Einsteins did, however, take many trips to more welcoming countries. They traveled to, and there's a picture of a book burning by the Nazis. They traveled to the Middle East, to Asia, and to the west coast of the United States. Everywhere they went, they were greeted by large cheering crowds. Japan even declared the day of Albert's arrival there as a national holiday. In Spain, he was greeted by the king and thousands of fans. Albert received an honorary degree from Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne, Harvard, and many other universities around the world. He was a guest professor, raised funds for Jewish causes, and warned of the growing political hatred in Germany. How strange for Albert to be adored all over the world except in the country where he had been born. The Nazis published a book called 100 Authors Against Einstein. All Albert said was, "Why 100? If I were wrong, one would have been enough." Hitler and the Nazis. Germany could not recover from the defeat in World War I. The treaty that ended the war left Germans hungry, poor, and feeling hopeless. The Nazis, the National Socialist Party, blamed Germany's problems on people of the Jewish religion. By the early 1930s, the Nazi Party had grown from a small band of people with extremely dangerous ideas to the most powerful political party in Germany. The Nazis were led by Adolf Hitler, who became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Hitler's government denied Jews a normal life. They could not go to school, hold jobs, own property, or worship. Eventually, the Nazis began murdering the Jews. They wanted to wipe every Jew off the face of the earth. The Nazis killed 6 million Jews before World War II ended in 1945, and Germany was defeated. Albert was very lucky. He had survived in Nazi Germany. In 1931, while Albert was guest professor in California, Adolf Hitler declared Albert a spy. Hitler got a death warrant for Albert. In 1933, while Albert and Elsa were returning home from their trip in California, Nazis broke into Einstein's summer home in Kappeln, Germany. A bread knife was found in the kitchen, a perfectly natural place for a bread knife to be. But the Nazis used the knife as proof of what a dangerous man Albert was. The Nazis seized everything Albert owned, his home and his money. Now there was no question about moving. Albert and Elsa rented a home in Belgium where Albert's stepdaughters also came to live. But in Belgium, a new book from the Germans was now available. It included photographs of Nazis' enemies. Albert's photo was on the very first page. There's a picture of them destroying his house with the words, "Not yet hanged," printed across it. That's really sad, isn't it? Belgium was not a safe place to stay either, but where could Einstein go? England? No, Elsa was afraid to live there. In England, the Nazis had offered a huge reward for Albert's murder. Albert joked, "I never knew I was worth so much." In the end, Albert and Elsa decided the United States would be their new home. Albert became a professor of mathematics at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. Albert asked for a salary of $3,000. Elsa got that up to $16,000. By the end of 1933, he and Elsa had settled into the small college town. The early years in Princeton were very difficult. Albert was 54. He was not a young man. He was no longer startling the world with new ideas. Then just 3 years after their move to Princeton, Elsa passed away. Albert was lonely and heartbroken. His own health suffered. He had barely left Elsa's side for the last 12 months of her life. Albert also kept hearing from friends who had been murdered in Germany. With all of the energy left that he had, he determined to do whatever he could to stop the Nazis. He played the violin at fundraising concerts, but that was not going to put an end to Hitler. Albert's famous equation, E equals mc squared, said that if just a few atoms were converted to energy, the amount of energy produced would be massive. In 1939, Albert learned that the European scientists were working on trying to make an atomic bomb. Albert feared that the Germans would do it if they were the what the Germans would do if they were the first to build such a bomb. So Albert wrote a letter to the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He asked that the United States begin developing an atomic bomb right away. This could not have been an easy letter for a man like Albert to write. Right, he hated war, he hated weapons. Yet now he was asking the United States to hurry up and build the most destructive bomb ever imagined. Even the simplest atomic bomb could destroy an entire city and kill thousands of people within seconds. But Albert thought that it would be worse if the Nazis were the only ones with such a weapon. Partly because of Albert's letter, President Roosevelt had a secret work begin on building an atomic bomb. The atomic bomb. In World War II, Japan joined forces with Germany and Italy. So now there were two fronts of the or areas of battle, Europe and the Isles in the Pacific Ocean. In the late 1941, the United States joined the countries England and France in the fight against Germany and Japan. American troops were sent to both battlefronts. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, an American military plane released an atomic bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. In an instant, 80,000 people were killed. Hiroshima simply ceased to exist. People at the blast center were vaporized. All that remained was the charged shadows on the walls of buildings. 3 days later, the U.S. dropped another bomb on another city, Nagasaki. Japan soon surrendered, and World War II finally came to an end. The world now had weapons that were destructive beyond imagination. Decades of scientific thought and research, including Einstein's, made the atomic bomb possible. War made it a reality. The world was never the same again. There's it dropping. Albert's letter reflected on this moment in world history. Later reflected on this moment in world history. I made one great mistake in my life when I signed the letter to President Roosevelt recommending that atomic bomb be made. But there was some justification, the danger that the Germans would make them. After World War II, Albert spent time and energy trying to limit the development of atomic weapons. I do not know how the Third World War will be fought, he warned, but I do know how the Fourth will, with sticks and stones. What he meant was that after a Third World War with atomic bombs, the modern world would be destroyed and humans would have to go back to living like cavemen. We scientists, Albert said, must consider it our solemn duty to do all in our power in preventing these weapons from being used. Even today, some people blame Einstein for the atomic bomb because he discovered the relationship between mass and energy. But can anybody blame Isaac Newton, who first explained the law of gravity for every plane that crashes to the ground? In 1940, at age 61, Albert became a citizen of the United States. For the rest of his life, he remained in Princeton, New Jersey, and worked on something called the unified field theory. But surprisingly, Albert never produced a finished theory. In many ways, Albert's life had come full circle. Toward the end of his life, he wrote, I am generally regarded as a sort of petrified object, rendered deaf and blind by the years. He loved to take walks just as he always had, and although Albert never drove a car, he loved to sail. He would take out a one-engine boat, aim it at another boat, and then at the last moment swerve away. That's a little dangerous. Here we go. In Princeton, he was a familiar sight, walking back and forth between his home and office, often chatting with neighbors. He spoke English with an accent. I think I will a little study. She is a very good theory. His shaggy hair, now white, grew even wilder, and he often went without socks, belts, or suspenders. Once some boys asked Albert why he never wore socks. With a sly smile, he answered that he was now old enough that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to. On his walks, Albert was known to stop and help a child fix a bicycle. And when a young girl came to his house asking for help with her math homework, Albert not only did just that, he shared his lunch of a can of baked beans with her. As for his own children, Albert rarely saw his sons. Hans had fled Nazi Germany and later moved to California. Edward and Mileva remained safe in Switzerland, where Mileva died in 1948. Albert's sister and best friend, Maja, came and lived with him in Princeton. As a child, Albert had a horrible temper that once led him to hit Maja in the head. In these later years, she'd smile and say, "To be the sister of a thinker, you must have a very thick skull." Life in Princeton was pleasant. In the evenings, just as Albert and his mother used to play duets, he played violin with other musicians. He ended up spending his last 20 years of his life at a house in 112 Mercer Street in Princeton. He loved the old house, its gardens, and the way the light came through the windows. When they first moved to Mercer Street, Elsa had a picture window put in Albert's study. From there, Albert could enjoy the beauty and majesty of nature as he always had, watching birds fly, flowers bloom, and the morning sunrise.